walking on the moon. Now, planting on the moon? In 2015, NASA will try to grow basil, sunflowers, turnips, and more in aluminum cylinders on the lunar surface. Various sensors will monitor the plant's growth and send data to us Earthlings, offending every locavore everywhere.
I'm Aki Roberge, an astronomer at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I've been studying a young nearby planetary system around the bright star Beta Pictoris. Located 63 light-years away and only about 20 million years old, the star is surrounded by a vast disk of gas, dust, and comet-like bodies that we view edgewise. We know of one planet in there too. It's a giant planet tracking along an orbit nearly as large as Saturn's. I'm part of a team studying Beta Pic's disk using the ALMA Observatory in Chile. We've found something odd. A belt of carbon monoxide gas centered about 3 times farther from the star than Neptune's distance from the Sun. The total amount of gas is about 1/6 the mass of all the water in Earth's oceans. What's interesting is that incoming ultraviolet light should break up the carbon monoxide molecules in little more than a century on average. This means that the carbon monoxide must be resupplied by the breakup of icy comets. To produce the amount of gas we detect, we're looking at the equivalent of the total destruction of a large comet every 5 minutes. From our data, we can tell that much of the carbon monoxide is in 1 or 2 massive clumps, which was very surprising. Because we're viewing the disk edge-on, we can't be sure if it's 1 or 2. Regardless, the comet supplying the gas must also be concentrated into clumps. How could this happen? If there is 1 clump, we think we're seeing the aftermath of a collision between 2 icy planets about the mass of Mars. Such a collision would have occurred about 500,000 years ago, releasing large quantities of gas and small comet-like fragments. The second, and we think more likely scenario, is that the carbon monoxide exists in 2 clumps and is continually replenished by collisions in huge comet swarms. We believe the comets are shepherded together by an as-yet undetected second planet, whose gravity confines the comets into a small region so they frequently collide. A planet with roughly Saturn's mass could do the job. Other observations hint that the brightest clump is moving in a way that makes the 2-clump scenario more likely. Further observations will track it in better detail and help us confirm this dramatic picture.
Civilization doomed to collapse soon. Ah, yes, all you...
Julio de 1969 al sur del Mar de la Tranquilidad. Horas más tarde, el comandante Neil Armstrong fue el primer hombre que puso su pie en el astro plateado, marcando con este hecho a toda una generación y por ende al resto de la historia de nuestro joven planeta. Mucho es lo que se ha hablado, mucho es lo que se ha opinado y especulado sobre este acontecimiento. Hay muchas personas que opinan que el vuelo del Apolo, el viaje del Apolo, nunca existió, pertenece al mundo de la ciencia ficción, que las imágenes que hemos podido contemplar han sido filmadas y trucadas en un estudio cinematográfico. Nosotros no vamos a entrar en esta discusión. Vamos a pensar, vamos a dirigirnos a otro aspecto de la cuestión, no menos interesante e intrigante. Les suponemos a ustedes enterados de los rumores que en los últimos meses azotan como un vendaval a la NASA. Unos rumores que nos hablan de unos archivos, unas imágenes, unas filmaciones, como mínimo incómodas para el programa espacial norteamericano y, por qué no decirlo, para el resto del mundo. Estas imágenes que hemos visto son un ejemplo esclarecedor, junto con otros archivos y otras imágenes, de una realidad que los gobiernos, las potencias, han querido ocultar a la opinión pública. ¿Por qué? Tal vez porque quieren cubrir algunos errores o porque su contenido revela una realidad realmente aterradora? Pensamos que es una buena pregunta. Quizás para responderla tengamos que retroceder a otra época, a unos tiempos donde no hubiera sido imaginable una salida al espacio, unos vuelos y tampoco unos eventuales paseos lunares. Desde el siglo XVIII, la comunidad astronómica comenzó a sentirse interesada por unas extrañas luces o haces lumínicos que podían ser vistos en las noches claras y despejadas en cráteres y valles lunares. Estos asombrosos eventos luminiscentes eran conocidos con el desapasionado nombre de fenómenos lunares transitorios. No obstante, estos fenómenos transitorios parecían empeñarse en dejarse ver por cada vez más número de estudiosos y apasionados selenógrafos. Pero, ¿qué estaba ocurriendo en la Luna? ¿Acaso una suerte de histeria colectiva había nublado el buen juicio de tantos científicos? Bien, nosotros no podemos pensar que personas, en su mayoría escépticas, pudieran caer en cuentos y habladurías. En los principios del programa espacial, el Apolo 8 observa una extraña fuente lumínica situada entre los cráteres Messier y Pickering de los montes Pickering. El Apolo 10 observa un pequeño objeto en el momento en que se está realizando el ensamblaje lunar. Y el Apolo 16 nos presenta unas imágenes de algo parecido a un ovni. Sin duda, en la Luna estaba y está ocurriendo algo extraordinario. Tal vez algo extraordinario ocasionado por fenómenos naturales desconocidos, o tal vez ocasionado por la acción de seres venidos de otros confines de la galaxia. Ya en los albores de la frenética carrera espacial, los soviéticos habían tomado la delantera con los programas Sputnik, Zond y Luna. Dos de estas últimas, Luna 17 y Luna 21, llevaban consigo dos pequeñas misiones robot conocidas como Lunokhod, sondas robot equipadas con todo tipo de artilugios destinados al análisis, clasificación y exploración de zonas que comprendían el cráter Monnier y las montañas Tauro. Sus fotografías, al igual que las de las misiones Apolo, mostraban una luna totalmente árida y carente de vida. Una luna árida y carente de vida es lo que cualquier científico serio apostaría y sin duda lo hace. Pero durante los años que duraron estas misiones hubo un ir y venir de datos como si se tratara de una novela de espías. Al parecer, las misiones soviéticas Lunokhod habrían encontrado algo inusual, algo fuera de toda lógica, algo que superaría a la mejor narración de ciencia ficción. Por imposible que parezca, de lo que nos hablarían estos datos filtrados, estas informaciones clasificadas, sería ni más ni menos que de restos de carácter, podríamos definirlo como manufacturado. Libres son los escépticos de tachar de falsas todas estas informaciones y datos, porque las autoridades soviéticas, con un hermetismo agresivo, nunca han permitido estudiar todas estas informaciones. Pero diferente es la cosa en el país del dólar, donde cualquier objeto, cualquier observación es susceptible de venta. Este es el caso de las películas y fotografías que hoy podremos ver, comentar y poner en tela de juicio. Muchos han querido ver en estos archivos la prueba definitiva de la existencia, lanzamiento y posterior ocultación de las misiones Apolo 18, 19 y, sobre todo, Apolo 20. Sobre esta última misión, el Apolo 20, recaería una gran rumorología de ocultación de elementos extraterrestres, o por lo menos, apoyándonos en las observaciones del Lunokhod 2, de elementos no naturales, manufacturados. Oficialmente el programa Apolo llegó a su fin con la misión Apolo-Soyuz, que sustituía la denominada y transformada Apolo 18. Años antes, El 19 de diciembre de 1972, Cernan, Smith y Evans del Apolo 17 concluían la sexta y última misión a suelo lunar. La Luna ya no interesaba a nadie, o al menos eso se deducía de la conducta de los gobiernos. Los recortes drásticos en materia económica del senador Bill Proxmith llevó a la necesaria desmantelación de numerosas instalaciones espaciales. Por su parte, el programa soviético, con su Lunokhod 2, dejó de funcionar tan solo 7 meses después de la llegada del Apolo 17. Un Lunokhod 2 que, habiendo hecho unas aportaciones interesantes, pues dejó de funcionar, como decimos, estando situado tan solo a 117 millas de los restos del módulo lunar del Apolo 17. Sin duda, un caldo de cultivo adecuado para diversas teorías y especulaciones sobre operaciones extrañas. Una de esas teorías nos hablaría de que quizás la misión Apolo hubiera sido solamente una pantalla, una cortina de humo para ocultar unas bases lunares cuyo fin sería la investigación y análisis de restos extraterrestres sobre nuestro satélite. A todas esas informaciones ocultas a la opinión pública, reunidas en un archivo, se le codificaría como Orange Mission. En sus pantallas, supuestas imágenes de NASA, retales tan solo de una gran cantidad de anomalías, de restos de algo o de alguien, imágenes imposibles, imágenes que transmitirían inquietud de ser ciertas, ya que nuestra historia quedaría vacía, incompleta, observada o manipulada, mutilada por la ignorancia o por la convicción de convertirse en algo aterrador, en algo demasiado complicado para querer ser entendido o explicado. Estas imágenes son realmente impactantes, quizás demasiado impactantes si no las vemos en un contexto aclarador. Sería posible que nos llevaran a conclusiones precipitadas, sobre todo si fueran avaladas por la NASA. Me explico. En esta fotografía podemos ver que existen unas imágenes. Una de ellas tiene la forma de una pirámide, claramente parece una pirámide o una construcción egipcia. Y en la parte inferior vemos una mancha. Hay que destacar que esta fotografía pertenece a los archivos de la NASA, concretamente al Apolo 17. Entonces, ¿qué impide a esta foto ser prueba de construcciones en la Luna? Lamentablemente para nuestro debate y también para los investigadores, lo que nos muestra esta foto no es lo que en principio pudiéramos pensar. Se trata de una fotografía desafortunada tomada desde la Tierra a control remoto y que nos muestra la base del vehículo lunar. Tras el hincapié hecho en esta pareidolia y con la precaución de dudar de lo que vemos o lo que queremos ver en las imágenes, continuaremos con su examen y con las opiniones de los científicos sobre ellas. Imágenes de Orange Mission. El astronauta parece que ha encontrado algo semienterrado en el suelo. Las comunicaciones están claramente alteradas. Lo que sea les provoca un gran asombro. Han localizado algo tal vez esperado y, por qué no decirlo, buscado. Al parecer, han encontrado una especie de losa o pequeña columna con rudimentarios grabados. Y con esta imagen estalla la polémica. ¿Truco, manipulación o realidad? Muy caprichosa debería ser la geología para generar unos ángulos tan perfectos en una simple roca. No, ni siquiera el espacio crea superficies de vértices tan definidos. Para muchos estas imágenes son pruebas irrefutables del paso de seres extraterrestres por la Luna. Y es más, de que la Luna es de origen extraterrestre. Estas teorías vendrían a coincidir con las afirmaciones de Bazin y Sherbakov, que afirmaban la naturaleza artificial de la Luna. Al parecer hay un grupo de militares estadounidenses vinculados a la operación Orbiter que afirman que en las fotografías tomadas alrededor de la Luna antes de la llegada del hombre allí, se observan construcciones en forma de cúpulas, edificios altos como agujas o edificios de fachadas resplandecientes. Arquitecturas construidas, según las mismas fuentes e hipótesis, ni más ni menos que con cristal. Incluso se apuntaría que esas construcciones, solo visibles en determinados momentos y según cómo los rayos del sol incidieran en las mismas, estas construcciones, repito, no serían fijas, sino que al parecer serían móviles, al disponer de capacidad de trasladarse por la superficie. Ciudades de cristal, restos extraterrestres, encuentros ovni. De un momento a esta parte, nuestra querida Luna se nos antoja extraña, más que desconocida, casi ajena. Rocas de hasta 10.000 millones de años, fechas imposibles que superarían incluso las edades de nuestro sistema solar. Una masa imposible sin la existencia de una estructura interna que la consolidara y la preservara de los terribles impactos de meteoros. Una composición química rica en elementos volátiles, gran cantidad de óxido férreo y elementos siderófilos, demasiado extraños, demasiado distintos de los de la Tierra. La posición exacta para equilibrar y defender a nuestro planeta. La posición y el tamaño exacto para cubrir perfectamente el Sol durante los eclipses. Una luna con dos caras muy distintas, como si una de ellas, el lado oculto de la misma, hubiera servido de escudo en un largo viaje. Ahora bien, ¿y si la luna no hubiera estado siempre ahí? ¿Y si nuestro joven planeta hubiera conocido un tiempo primigenio más convulso e inestable, en donde sus cielos nocturnos quedaran libres del majestuoso satélite? Con todos estos datos, y más si caben, derivados de la observación de estas imágenes, a Bazin y Sherbakov no les faltó tiempo para reunir todas las teorías y formular una nueva que daría fin y compendio a todas ellas. Según esta teoría, efectivamente la Luna tendría un origen distante y habría sido colocada deliberadamente en la órbita terrestre por seres con la tecnología suficiente como para convertir una roca inerte en una verdadera nave espacial. Esta arca de Noé intergaláctica probablemente transportaría los últimos resquicios de una civilización moribunda, que al toparse con un planeta convulso, pero adecuado para la vida, intercedería deliberadamente en su evolución. Pero, ¿quiénes podrían ser esos seres? Y, sobre todo, de ser cierta esta teoría, ¿dónde están? Bien, por rocambolesco que les parezca, Bazin y Sherbakov apuntan la posibilidad de que esos seres, procedentes de un rincón remoto de la galaxia, capaces de viajar durante décadas en la nave Luna, con capacidad de intervenir y modificar las condiciones de un planeta, capaces de determinar la evolución de las especies, esos seres, apuntan Bazin y Sherbakov, seríamos nosotros. Nosotros mismos o tal vez una pequeña variante sin acondicionar al nuevo mundo. Imágenes imposibles, imágenes del pasado que nos pronostican un futuro, un legado y una historia ocultada, cegada por los intereses de las grandes potencias o por lo contrario, ocultada por temores y miedos, temores de algo demasiado grande, demasiado indómito para ser controlado. Un sueño que nos alejara de la esclavitud del consumismo de los amos de los mercados. La nave luna, la luna madre, vientre de vida, el arca de la alianza, el arca del cataclismo y las inundaciones, el arca de las huestes angélicas, de ángeles caídos, de demonios y de antiguas guerras sobrenaturales. Tal vez el arca de los dioses del cielo. Una realidad y unas cuestiones demasiado extrañas. Toda una civilización tutelada por unos padres o dioses. Y por otra parte, una conspiración de silencio e ignorancia auspiciada por unos gobiernos maliciosos. Y finalmente, una luna capaz de actuar como una guardería, una escuela, para un futuro salto al espacio. Muchas preguntas y muchas incógnitas emanan de toda esta historia. ¿Cómo es posible que las civilizaciones antiguas no hayan dejado ningún dato, no aporten ninguna información sobre todo ello? ¿Cómo es posible que no hayan quedado restos materiales de ninguna clase de aquella tecnología? Todas estas y otras preguntas las abordaremos.
Mission Control Houston, we are using the payload bay cameras right now to hopefully catch a glimpse of the Russian space station Mir as it performs an on-orbit burn. Though it will be difficult to pick Mir out from the stars as they pass behind us, the payload bay cameras are positioned such that they're looking straight back behind the orbiter, where the Mir is flying at about 850 nautical miles behind us.
No joy from here, Story. Hope it was a good one, though, for our friends.
Thank you, sir. We could not see it here either. We'll wait 2 or 3 more minutes till sunrise, and then at that time give you a go for KU stow.
We're at a mission elapsed time of 7 days, 13 hours, and 17 minutes. This is Mission Control Houston. The Mir space station is now visible on the far left-hand side of the screen, about an inch from the bottom of this particular picture. Okay, the Mir space station is the small flashing light in the center, about an inch from
Camera Charlie on a monitor.
the left-hand side of the screen. It's slowly...
Tally ho on the camera.
It is slowly moving closer to the left-hand side and is has a very light flashing to it.
We think on the middle of the screen, way to the left-hand side. We think you can see a flashing light just a little bit to the left of the center of the screen, very faint.
Yeah, we do see something flashing visually, but we're not sure that might be...
This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, we believe we were just able to spot the Mir spacecraft as it flies about at 850 nautical.
Hey guys, by now we've all seen this object going in front of the sun. I'm fairly interested in why that picture blanks out. Anyway, I'm going to take you over here and we're gonna investigate this a little bit. 4 or 5 little spots behind it there. Can we see this? That's as close as I can get in there. She's not impressive, you know, being a little black dot. Pretty hard to be impressed with a little black dot. Compared to the sun's size, though, we know it's a fairly big object, or planet, or whatever, what have you. Well, one thing we know for sure, I'm pretty sure anyway, is that this object did not go in front of the sun.
It gives me great honor tonight to introduce Zecharia Sitchin again this hour, an eminent Orientalist, biblical scholar. Zecharia Sitchin, distinguished by his ability to read ancient Sumerian clay tablets and other ancient texts. Through such texts, religious documents, and archaeological findings, he has reconstructed epic events that support the existence of extraterrestrial gods who once set nation against nation and man against man. Zecharia Sitchin is a graduate of the University of London, worked as a journalist and editor in Israel for many years, living now and writing in New York, and he is our proud guest tonight on Coast to Coast. Zecharia, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine, George.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Tell me how this all started for you, Zecharia, how you started researching the Sumerian tablets.
Well, it's a long story, and I've told it already many times, and it all goes back to when I was a schoolboy, fortunate to study the Bible, the Old Testament, in its original Hebrew language, and I asked improper questions of the teacher and got reprimanded, and that's how it started.
As you began to unravel the mysteries of the tablets, and you are a scholar and an expert, and I think that helped you a lot when you were able to decipher.
Well, it just took a lifetime, that's all.
It is. It has been your lifetime. You've devoted, gosh, your whole life to this.
Yeah.
And yet, I've got to tell you, Zecharia, no matter where I go, what conference I go to, phone calls to this program, people are always asking about your work and what you've done. Always.
Well, the books, that number 13 by now, have been translated to some 24 or 25 languages. They are now being translated in China, by the way. And also the Vietnamese decided that they cannot survive without reading my books in their language. So it is a worldwide phenomenon, if I can use the word,
you sure
with
can.
some pride, yeah.
You're entitled to that. Where do you get all your energy, Zecharia?
I don't know. I think I really think sometimes that maybe that's what I'm meant to do, and I always wonder whether I should write the one more book, because maybe my mission would come to an end.
Well, you're a young what? How old are you now?
That's not a nice question. I'm no longer running in the marathon. Let's put it that
but
way.
you're still going strong, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
This latest work, the Earth Chronicles Handbook, I enjoyed it because it puts together all of the work you did in the 7 books of the Earth Chronicles.
Right.
It kind of makes all of it even easier to understand. I mean, you reading all the books, very enjoyable, very educational, but you capsulized everything in one book, and it was very helpful. It's almost like a guide, I think.
Well, like I say, it's a GPS to my books.
Absolutely. It is. In all the times that you've done your work, Zecharia, have you uncovered events later on in your research that you looked at and said, I didn't see this in the beginning, but I see this now? Was there anything that ever changed?
Not basically, but I must tell you that is the question that I sometimes wonder myself, because yes, as I reread some of my early books, The 12th Planet, the Stairway to Heaven, etc., and in view of the later research and writings, and in view, most importantly, of our own scientific advances, I say, oh, my God, that's really that, which maybe I've missed before. I sometimes say, when I'm asked, how come that others who have discovered the tablets and deciphered them, etc., and started to translate them, how come they didn't realize that this text or this tale really tells this and that. And I say, well, we are all captives of our time and our technology. So if, for example, there is, and let's not forget the many illustrations, there are about 120 in each book. So if there is an illustration from antiquity that shows a so-called eagle men, ancient astronauts, saluting a rocket. Now, if that same depiction would have been shown to me 100 years ago, I would have said, well, this is, I don't know, some two bird-like people saluting a very large pencil. And if somebody would say, no, it's not a pencil, it's a rocket, I would say, rocket, what's a rocket? So obviously, as we advance and as science keeps confirming and confirming, for example, when I started writing, and I said, according to the Sumerians, Mars served as a way station, that was really held to be almost ridiculous, because Mars was deemed a totally uninhabitable planet with no air and no atmosphere and no water and no nothing. So here I come and say they said that Mars was a way station, a space base. And now we know that there was water on Mars, and maybe there still is now water on Mars. There were seas and lakes, etc., etc. Now I said that they came here because they needed gold with which to protect their dwindling atmosphere. And now I read that a statement a couple of weeks ago by the chief scientific advisor of President Obama, who at a conference dealing with global warming, which is really climate change, said, well, all options are on the table, including geoengineering. Now, what is geoengineering? He was asked, he said, well, even such a fantastic idea as creating a shield above our atmosphere to shield us from the sun. And that's exactly what I said the so-called Anunnaki who had come here had done on their planet so long ago. So, yes, as I read and reread, I find new points, and of course, the most important thing, I find corroboration of things that when I first published, or when the first book was published, it took me 30 years to research it. That seemed so outlandish.
And what is so remarkable now, too, Zechariah, astronomers are beginning to discover distant planets now in other systems. And, one day they will find that extra planet in this solar system, I am sure.
Well, they found it in 1983. The so-called IRAS,
Right. But do you think that is Nibiru?
Of course. Well, I had one of my friends was the important astronomer Harrington at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and I met him, and he gave me an interview on tape, videotape, and he pointed to a bookshelf behind his desk, and there was my book, the one you mentioned, The 12th Planet. And he said, whenever I reach a tough question, a tough point, I pick up your book, he said, for inspiration and guidance. So, no, the planet was seen, and it was immediately the next day, quashed and hush-hushed, and then, as I write in my book, Genesis Revisited, it led to the whole change in relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. And if you recall, I'm sure, George, that Reagan went to the United Nations and speaking about his meetings with Gorbachev said, I told him, and Reagan points with his finger up, he said, what if we all realized that we are in danger from somewhere else? Wouldn't we forget our small quabbles and unite, etc.?
So true. Zechariah, you stay with us. We're going to come right back and chat with you a little bit more about this incredible new work, the Earth Chronicles Handbook, and also find out if they're ever going to come back. Zechariah's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com right now, but let me spell it for you. It is SITCHIN.com. I'm George Norrie. You're listening to Coast to Coast AM, and we'll be right back in just a moment with our special guest this hour, Zechariah Sitchin, author of The Earth Chronicles and the Earth Chronicles Handbook.
Get daily show updates right to your inbox for free with the new Coast Zone newsletter. Sign up today at coasttocoastam.com.
And welcome back to Coast for the rest of this hour. A chat with Zechariah Sitchin, author of numerous books. This one, the Earth Chronicles Handbook. Zechariah, two things really fascinate me. Your work on the Anunnaki and, of course, biblical prophecy, both of which you've studied quite a bit, probably more than most. Do they tie in together, the Anunnaki? I mean, will they return?
Yes.
Do we see that happening during like the time of the apocalypse?
Well, we are starting to use words that different people attach different meanings to them. So let me answer your loaded question by saying that first of all, I firmly believe in the veracity of the Bible as a whole and in the veracity of its prophecies. And that's where I start from. Secondly, I have no doubt that my understanding, and by now hopefully it's not just mine, that all the ancient records, some of which are the basis for my various books, are not mythology, and that they are really records of things that really happened in the past. Just as a side remark, when I'm asked what do I think my most important contribution has been to understanding where we came from and where we are going. In my first book, The 12th Planet, people expect me to say that there's one more planet, etc., etc., and I say, I think that my most important contribution is the ability to show, if not fully convince everybody, that the ancient myths are not mythology. I de-mythologize mythology. And I think this is the second important point to remember. So there's no doubt in my mind, and I say that after a lifetime of research, and my most important critic is I myself, asking myself, am I sure? Is it convincing, etc., etc.? And that is that others from another planet in our own solar system, that's a key difference. I'm not talking about what people would grant you. Well, this whole thing, the nonsense about extraterrestrial, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We, of course, as thinking and intelligent people, we do not rule out that there's some life somewhere else, but this is light years away, and they'll never visit us, and we'll never visit them. I say, no, there's another planet with advanced people on it in our own solar system. So travel is possible, communication is possible. So I'm sure that they were here, and they did what partly the Bible and partly all the other sources say. And when it comes to this question that you pose, is this, will they return? Now, I used to avoid answering the question by saying, you're asking, will they return, but are you sure they left? And of course, then the questioner would be stymied, and I will not answer the question. But I did write, as I'm sure you know, and we can mention it, another book titled The End of Days, which was the concluding book of the series, the Earth Chronicle series. And I provide evidence, including some data from NASA, that around 550 BC, they did leave. But they promised to return. There's no doubt about it. They promised to return. Whether, even if you go to the so-called Mayan or Aztec, Quetzalcoatl, before he left, he said, I will return. And he said, I will return, and he gave them a date. He said, when the bundle will come together, and the king Montezuma thought that when Cortez showed up, he thought, well, that's the date.
That was it, yeah.
And the God has returned, and he paid dearly for the mistake. But there was certainty that they were promised, on the other side of the world, in the Americas. And I show, by the way, in my books, I have the book, The Lost Realms, show that the whole thing is one ball of wax. All the gods were the same gods, though called by different names. So they will return, and the biblical prophecies will come true.
And it could come sooner than later, I would assume, Zechariah.
Their time scale is not our time scale. In my book, When Time Began, I give three like calendars. I say there's the earthly calendar that you and I use, and say today is Monday, etc. And then there's the divine calendar, which is their orbital period. And then I said to combine the two to create some kinds of sense of proportion. They devised what I call the celestial calendar, which is really what we call the zodiac, the 12 zodiacal houses, or stations as they were called in antiquity by the Sumerians. So this is their clock, and we are in the age, still in the age of Pisces. And as far, George, as I can understand the prophecies, there was a very wise and important fellow called Daniel, and he was privileged because the angels were speaking to him.
That's right.
And he could question them, and he kept asking them, when will they return? And he got all kinds of answers, including the famous times and a half, and Sir Isaac Newton, by the way, I mentioned him, and I was privileged to see his handwritten document where he made the calculations, and he also arrived at a variety of dates, but his preferred date was 2060 AD. which is still this century. So I think, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that we are talking about this century.
If you were a university professor, I would be mesmerized in your class, Zechariah, and the bell would ring, and I think I'd still be sitting there listening.
George, if I were a university professor, I would be unable to write my books.
That's true.
Because all those very distinguished professors, whom I respect greatly, who are experts in their fields, and for example, in archaeology, one of them can pick up some shard from some broken up clay vessel, and he'll tell you that this is from the early Bronze Age, something that I cannot do. But they are specialized, and in order to keep their positions and be able to publish, etc., they have to follow the line. And many of them, when at scientific meetings and others which I used to attend, they come and whisper to me, "Of course you're right, but I cannot say so." So I think I and my readers and your listeners are blessed that I did not become an academic professor, because then I would be bound by political correctness, etc., and would hesitate to speak out.
Yeah, somebody would have tried to have muffled you, and I'm glad that...
I would muffle myself, because, people make a living and have to protect their tenure, etc., and so I respect them, I understand them, but I have the freedom of calling it as I see it.
Zechariah, there is a date that keeps coming up now based on the Mayan calendar, and I am wondering if that ever came up in any of your research at all, and that, of course, is that December 21st, 2012 date.
Yes, of course. I deal with that head-on in this book that I mentioned, The End of Days. I actually dealt with it 15 years ago.
Way before most people were even talking about it.
15 years ago in the book The Lost Realms, I showed that even if some give credence to the so-called Mayan prophecies, and one can give more credence or less credence, etc. I mean, they don't stand on the same footing as the biblical prophecies, of course. So even if you do that, there is a simple matter of how you calculate, how you divide the number of days that have passed from day one till the so-called day where the 13th Baktun ends. And if you divide by 365 and a quarter, you arrive at 2012. But if you look at how the so-called Mayan calendar is constructed, which is actually the Olmec calendar, you see that it is based on 360. It is a mathematical calendar, and if you divide the number of days by 360, you arrive not at 2012, but I don't remember precisely now. It's either 2057 or 2087. I don't remember.
But it's in that gap somewhere.
Yes. So the 2012 is, in my opinion, not on firm footing. And I have, by the way, a DVD that's titled 2012, dealing with the issue. And if people click on my website, they'll see how to get it. So that doesn't mean that I don't give credence to the Mayan tales. I mentioned, the promise of Quetzalcoatl to return.
Yes.
I even showed that, which nobody else does, because they didn't go to Mexico as many times as I did, and go to museums where nobody else goes and found those things. There's actually a sculpture, a Mayan sculpture, where the god, the departing god, that is depicted, by the way the Mesopotamians depicted their gods, tells a Mayan chieftain, points to him to the 10th planet, the Nibiru, and says, I assume, because there's the symbol for speaking, that's where I'm going back to, and I'll come back. So I'm not oblivious to the American legends, information, etc. But I deal with it perhaps more precisely than others.
You know how many people you have touched, how many lives you have touched with your work, and I would even go as far to say that this radio program, Coast to Coast AM, when Art Bell started it many years ago, had a strong basis in your work.
Yeah, well, I was his guest many times, and he really pioneered a lot, and one has to give him credit for this program.
Nearly every culture, ancient culture, has talked about end-time prophecy, which in some form or fashion, as a member of the human race, it's kind of scary when you think about it. I've got grandchildren and children, and I think about them, Zechariah. I think about what's going to happen and what's left for them. Does this bother you at all? Does this scare you at all, knowing what you know?
Well, I have great-grandchildren, so of course I'm thinking of their future too. Well, I don't know whether scary is the word. It's we are definitely maybe we are fortunate that we are living at this time of end of era. But as I point out in this book, The End of Days, and in my videos and talks, etc., and now I have the opportunity to say it on your program, George, is that when one wants to understand what was prophesied, what happened in the past, and what might happen in the coming future, is one has to remember that all the prophecies are making it very clear when, for example, there is a statement, I'm the first and I'm the last. The last things shall be the first things, etc. We are talking about a cyclical. We are not talking about a linear progression. Right. That's why when there was year 2000 and people asked me what would happen in 2000, I said after 2000 will come 2001, because this is a linear calendar. It's a linear calendar. So we have to deal with the cyclical calendar. The zodiac is a cyclical calendar. And therefore, every ending is a beginning. Every ending is a beginning. So let's not lose hope.
Zechariah, do you know if the Sumerian tablets are still intact, or, were any of them ruined because of the war in Iraq, or are they still in a museum, safe and sound? Do you know?
Well, those that were taken out of Iraq, and we are talking now 150 years of archaeology, so there are tens of thousands of tablets, some fully intact, and some partially intact, and some in fragments, and some fully legible, and some not legible to some extent, and by the way, of the libraries that were found, for example, in the ruins of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, in the library of the king Ashurbanipal, some 30,000 tablets were discovered just in one library.
Oh my gosh!
So they were taken mostly out of Iraq, and they are in various museums, the British Museum, the Louvre in Berlin, and some in Philadelphia, and other museums, and many of them have been read and deciphered, and some of those deciphered were published, but most of them linger in basements of the museums because there are just not enough people who can sit with magnifying glasses and read those tablets.
In your entire life, because we're running out of time here, and I want to thank you for spending the hour with us. I know it's very late on the East Coast where you are.
George. It's my pleasure.
In your entire life and career, what has been for you the most remarkable thing that you've touched, that in terms of work? Was it the Earth Chronicles, the writing of the 12th planet? What was it?
Well, to some extent, the most gratifying thing was my own sense of discovery. That here I'm looking at lines that, and I'm not talking just about the tablets that most people cannot read, and I'm fortunate that I can read them. But even looking at the Bible, and most people get the Bible either through what they hear from Sunday preachers, or they read in translation. Every translation is an interpretation. Not many are fortunate, like I've been, to study the Old Testament in its original Hebrew. So there's this personal gratification as I watch the news and see that, for example, when I say that Nibiru was a planet thrust out from another solar system and got attracted into ours. So at that time, who would believe in what they now call extrasolar planets, of which some 300 have been discovered already?
You have given us a gift, Zechariah Sitchin, with all your work, including the latest, the Earth Chronicles Handbook. And thank you so much for being on Coast to Coast AM.
An extraordinary opening in space or time that connects travelers to distant realms. A good portal is a shortcut, a guide, a door into the unknown. If only they actually existed. It turns out that they do, sort of. And a NASA-funded researcher at the University of Iowa has figured out how to find them. We call them X-points, or electron diffusion regions, explains plasma physicist Jack Scudder of the University of Iowa. They're places where the magnetic field of Earth connects to the magnetic field of the Sun, creating an uninterrupted path leading from our own planet to the Sun's atmosphere 93 million miles away. Observations by NASA's Themis spacecraft and Europe's cluster probes suggest that these magnetic portals open and close.
when they went to the moon, they forgot to tell us about its true natural color. This is a film that challenges anyone to prove to us the moon is gray. It's not. The moon filmed in full color and using a backyard telescope and a $68 webcam. And then you get to look at the pictures. Colors galore. And what's really fun, Jose, is when you show the Apollo astronauts up there on the moon, and all around them is this gray and black terrain. And yet when you look in the faceplate of the spacesuit, I don't know which astronaut that is, back at the camera, you see color. You see colorful soil. You see color. Yeah, Buzz Aldrin. You see colors all over the place. And now, who took this film of the moon with color?
This was taken by NASA during the Clementine mission back in 1994.
Okay.
At least that's when they supposedly released the full color photography that exists. In my film Celestial, you'll find that I was trying to research and find this crater called Guyot, G-U-Y-O-T, which is above the crater that's featured in Celestial, the Lobachevsky crater, where there seems to be an object that was built within an 8-month period that's 10 miles wide and 6 miles high. Somebody built it between Apollo 16 and Apollo 17.
You have a starting time frame, an image, which it's not there, and then 8 months later it's there.
Yeah. So somebody built this 10-mile wide, 6-mile high structure on this crater called Lobachevsky. And Apollo 16, they photographed it. I mean, all of the Apollo missions had an interest on Lobachevsky crater for whatever reason. They've been filming that crater since Apollo 8. Okay, so they've been filming it and photographing it. And then Apollo 16, which was in April of 72, there was an excavation going on, and there's a photo that shows a thing I call the excavator. That seems to be a machine of some type, or maybe a living creature or something that's digging the hole.
Okay.
Or 8 months later, this huge structure appears. And you can see those in the Celestial
photos section. All right,
the first photo, the top photo, Apollo
Let's click
16.
on that right now. Celestial film reveals moon structures and colors. Photos. Look for that.
Yes.
And click on that, which I'm doing right now. I can get it.
You can see what appears to be a hole being dug, and there's it looks like a tower or a cross, white one. And then in the next photo, you don't see the tower, but you see what looks like a machine or a creature. I call it the excavator that's excavating. And that's from Apollo 16 photography. And then on the Apollo 17 photography in December 72, this structure now appears. And it appears to have cables strewing out of the top, and it's 6 miles high, 10 miles wide.
Okay, let me go back. Let's go back to the first picture. People have got photos loaded up now. This is Celestial. Look for the Celestial photos and click on the text, and you'll load that page up. Apollo 16, April 1972. And if you'll look, you'll see there's an item clearly in the foreground, right dead center, right above the A in April. And you can scroll down to the next image, and there's a close-up of that. Wow.
It looks like Mothra. Remember that old sci-fi movie?
Oh, sure.
You know, or Rodin, you know, but Mothra, this looks like a worm of some kind or something, or a caterpillar or something.
Well, it also looks like, the shape of it looks like almost a soda bottle laying on its side with the bottom blown out of it.
Yeah, but you can see a shadow underneath it where it's hovering.
I see that.
Covered.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. We don't know what it is. Can't explain it. NASA's definitely not making any remarks about it, but it appears in one of the Apollo 16 photography taken at the same time in April of 1972.
I'm looking at it with a magnifying glass, and the bottom end of it, the left end, the top, has two what look like almost appendages. Although that could be something. Again, I also see it though as dark in there. It looks like something could have blown. I don't know what it is, but it's right next to.
Don't know what it is either.
A crater or something that has been dug out. And
yeah, that's that portion. If you go back to the Apollo 16 photo, you can see this thing. It's almost a color gray, but you can see what appears to be a white cross and the hole that's being dug.
Uh-huh.
But that's the exact same position that on the Apollo 17 photo.
Galaxies are the building blocks of the universe. The giant galaxies we see today, even our own, were built up from many smaller galaxies. But construction isn't done yet. It continues even today. Full-grown galaxies approach and interact with each other. They may collide and eventually merge.
As the galaxies approach, the tug of gravity creates tides that distort their shapes. Stars and gas stream into new orbits. Sometimes they're completely ejected, trailing into the depths of intergalactic space.
Gas clouds compressed in the chaos light up with intense rounds of star formation.
Because stars create most of the chemical elements, such episodes have a profound effect on a galaxy's chemical makeup.
This infrared image of the entire sky shows 500 million stars. Most are in our galaxy.
Some are not. These are companion galaxies that orbit our Milky Way.
And some are in between.
In 1994, astronomers discovered that some of these stars actually belong to a different galaxy. It's called the Sagittarius Dwarf Elliptical, and the Milky Way is tearing it apart.
As the dwarf galaxy passes through the Milky Way's disk, gravitational tides stretch the dwarf stars into long streams that wrap around the galaxy's orbit.
For the dwarf, it's a fatal attraction.
For the Milky Way, it's but one of many similar events that shaped our home galaxy. But there's something much bigger headed our way.
M31, the Andromeda Galaxy. This is no dwarf. It's the Milky Way's biggest neighbor, of roughly the same size, mass, and type.
Astronomers say the crash will begin about 2 billion years from now.
This supercomputer simulation shows how the event may unfold over billions of years. The first pass distorts the two great spirals. Stars are tossed into the intergalactic night like sparks thrown from a campfire.
Our Sun, complete with planets in tow, could be similarly ejected.
Each pass blurs the identities of each galaxy.
Eventually, Andromeda and the Milky Way will merge into a single entity some astronomers call Milkomeda.
How did the shape, structure, and chemical content of galaxies change over the sweep of cosmic history?
Deep surveys by the James Webb Space Telescope will capture the full panorama.
From the earliest dwarfs that formed to the familiar galaxies we see around us today.
Because these technologies are so godlike, and I use that term very precisely, because if you understand how the fundamental structure of the universe really works, and you then construct technologies that allow you to manipulate those forces directly, you have the command and control of not only energy and unlimited resources, but you also probably have technologies that can interfere with the so-called natural biological life cycles of human beings or other living creatures on Earth. And lifespans can be extended probably thousands or even maybe tens of thousands of years because of the ability to repair entropic breakdown of DNA and you know the ends of DNA. Those telomeres is what they're called, which seem to control our aging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this breakaway civilization, if Dolan and I and Joseph and Lavenda and Timothy and others are correct, there is almost no way to realistically calibrate how far ahead of us they are. I would say, using our crude historical rule of thumb, they could be 1,000 years ahead of us by now, even though it's only 50 years. Now, think about that. I mean, just think about that. If you have a group of fanatic, dedicated Nazis with their perspective on the rest of human beings, humanity on Earth, where they consider most of humanity, which is not white and blonde-haired, to be basically a primitive, inferior species, how would a civilization imbued with technological capabilities that allow them to, at some level, even move planets, let me repeat that, to actually move celestial objects? Because remember, this allows you to negate inertia and gravity and control the forces of gravity so you could set up your own orbits, et cetera, et cetera. If those types of capabilities are in the hands of Nazis, like we've seen in all those movies, I mean, we are in deep, deep trouble. And that is the focus of this conference, to explore the scientific evidence that, in fact, that has, in fact, occurred.
I mean, Farrell talked about even the bailout money being tied into this. Basically, obviously, there must be a question here of how this thing is or was then at least funded. I mean, if they're so advanced at this point, they could probably go out there, get whatever resource they would want, gold, diamonds, oil, what have you, things we don't even might know about at this point. But how do you think that this thing was started?
Let me stop you there, because I think you raise a really important point. I presume you have watched Star Trek, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Gene Roddenberry, my dear departed friend, created this amazing vision of a human race living and working together and encountering alien species and living and working together with them in the so-called Federation of Planets, right? And from time to time, they will have scripts or story arcs where people who are still primitive like us, meaning that they are dealing with limited resources, limited energy, limited environment, living space, etc., encounter representatives of the Federation. And it was Gene's great pride to talk about how at that point in time we will have bypassed the concept of money, of possession, of big stuff. Not personal stuff, but big stuff. And the reason is just what you said. If you can tap the real forces of the universe, if you can provide access through some technological means to unlimited pollutionless energy in whatever form you desire, be it coherent, like electricity, radio technology, radio waves, lasers, whatever, or incoherent, like heat, just to keep yourself warm, and that allows you then to manipulate the resources of an entire solar system, or, and this is probably going to raise some eyebrows, to create matter out of nothing, out of empty space itself, out of the ether, which I have seen experiments that demonstrate that that's possible with this physics, then you don't need money. You don't need the kind of primitive economy that we are dealing with. But reversing your question, who in that larger picture would still need money, and a lot of it, if they in fact are looking forward to some cataclysmic, shall we say, change in the planet here itself in the foreseeable future? Obviously, the terrestrial representatives of this breakaway civilization here on Earth, still kept, still trapped, still here with within our civilization and amongst us. And if you wanted to identify a class of people that would describe, I think I'm describing the banksters.
Mm-hmm.
I think describing the people who run the world because they do control the money of our primitive economy and society. And so all these trillions of dollars that are going into some black hole, because it's certainly not going into what it's being purported that they were being, taken from taxpayers to be used for. I think that is a stash or a secret fund or a basically pirate treasure that these rip-off artists are taking from the rest of us so they can somehow carve out their own separate civilization when push comes to shove, and these other guys decide that they no longer need 6 billion of us on planet Earth. And that time appears to be approaching from the circumstantial evidence we're seeing, given the rate at which things are accelerating in the financial markets, in terms of global geology, in terms of very bizarre anomalies taking place around the Earth. So I think not only are we looking at a secret space program, but we're probably looking now at a secret space war being fought between those on Earth who are trying to maintain their position and those out there who have finally decided that if we continue along our present track, we will become a competition for them, and they cannot allow that. They cannot, afford to have that happen, and so they are taking steps to basically quarantine us here on Earth. And I believe that the evidence will support that they are using this extraordinary technology for some demonstrations of the awful power they possess in terms of blackmailing governments on this planet to do their bidding, to stay home and not become competitors.
See, it's a very interesting point. I want to, ask you about the representatives here as well. I mean, the Nazis always comes up as the arch villain, it seems like, and I don't think a lot of people would agree that many of the banksters that you mentioned are kind of Aryan Germans at this point.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
We know from Lavenda's work, we know from Dolan, we know from Joseph Farrell, that in fact the banksters bankrolled the Nazis. They created the Nazis. They during the 20s and 30s and 40s, they were the ones who were totally behind them. What I think we might be seeing is an expression from an old movie now, when thieves fall out. Because I believe what they did not understand is that they were pawns too. They thought they were the masters of the universe. And they've now found out, to their extraordinary shock and surprise, that there is much victims and in prison here. I mean, we have an American author. I don't know whether you ever had him on your show. His name is Alex Jones, and he runs a website called prisonplanet.com.
Sure.
I think Alex Jones has absolutely got it correct. We are on, if this model is accurate, a prison planet, and someone now is trying to keep us from breaking out.
But who, again, if we go back to this idea, and this is the difficult part here, who is the elite and also what is the ideology behind them? Because I believe, just as you said, I think that the Nazis were set up in order to fulfill the agenda of somebody much higher, if you will, up on this hierarchy, on this ladder of things. So what if we go into this aspect of talking about some of the motives here, the philosophy that is driving this? I mean, if it's only and solely was a Nazi agenda, then at this point, if the point here was to eradicate as many people as possible, why wouldn't they have done so already? If we look at it from that point of view, and if it's not Nazis at the ultimate tip of this pyramid, who is doing this, Richard? Who's behind it?
Well, you have to again back off and look at this from a big perspective. again, in the timeline that Farrell and Lavenda and Dolan and I are looking at, we're looking at the events from World War II leading to a breakaway group of Nazis with this control of technology and physics, able to live anywhere they want to. But it's a relatively tiny group of people to start with. Now, you can live anywhere you want to, but is anywhere you want to as nice as Earth? Remember, in the entire solar system, the only planet where you can walk on beaches and look at sunsets and admire aurora and basically live as, you know, we have been living for thousands of years without technology is here. So even if you command these extraordinary forces, you cannot remake entire planets within, let's say, 60 years, so Earth is still the place that you probably want to, if not live, at least vacation. And to do that, you need the accommodation of various governments so that you have some kind of a modus vivendi where you leave them alone and they leave you alone. I mean, 6 billion people working day and night produce a lot of stuff that whoever is running the show, even from off planet, could probably benefit from. It's not so much that the Nazis were out to exterminate everybody. They were out to exterminate certain competing groups. Remember, like the Masons, who had the same occult ideas that the Nazis did, and then, of course, they were competitors, so they had to be eliminated. The same way with the Jews. They were another group of competing peoples, because if you look back in Jewish tradition, particularly the work of Stan Tenen at the Meru Foundation, you'll find the roots of this physics in Hebrew documentation extending back all the way through the Torah. The keys to this physics are in some of the most ancient sacred documents on planet Earth. And it turns out that those are the peoples that the Nazis targeted for extinction, for extermination. Because if you eliminate the people in terms of, let's say, the Jewish faith, you eliminate the carrier wave of the very physics that allows you to control them. So again, it was about eliminating competition. Ultimately, I don't believe that this group is out to destroy 6 billion people on the Earth. I think you're going to let nature try to do that because the physics of the planet itself is changing in a cyclic pattern. And we can see that in various records, like from the U.S. Geological Survey, which shows us that earthquakes and volcanoes and major geological disturbances have been on a monotonic increase for the last several decades. Well, our physics model predicts, in fact, when you look at the solar system, when you look at NASA data, you see planetary changes all over the solar system, which I think are part of a huge natural cycle of this physics, which has to do with alignments, where planets are relative to the center of the galaxy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at very long time cycles.